prereq. So we want to. We're going to talk about it in the fall, like whether we reach the DIY audience with some workshops or not. What what we could do in the summertime.
But those would have to be like just separate courses. That's not part of the regular curriculum, right?
Yeah, we have a customized training division that we can set up whatever we want to teach, and then it's just a matter of, if enough people sign up, you run it, and if not enough people sign up, then you give them a refund. So we're thinking about doing just like a guitar player, basic maintenance type summer workshop to start, but we could do more specialized stuff as well. Just a matter of having enough people, usually 12 to 15 people, we can do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
James, is the last loose saber, the first batch, all wrapped up?
Nearly.
No.
I had some contact with oh shoot, I forget his name. But yeah, he wants to get it, so that's basically it.
Okay. Is he Canadian too?
Yes.
What's up with these Canadians?
I'm getting pretty good at the international shipping.
Well, that should be good. But is it just Canada, or is the South American stuff just as difficult?
I haven't tried. I don't think I've done Europe and Canada.
Well, how you feeling?
Good. You?
Good. Shane, do it after this. I got the back brakes on my Subaru today, and after we get done here, I'm gonna get the front brakes on. And I just looked up how much shops are charging to do that in my neighborhood, and I felt pretty good about myself.
I've got a neighbor who's really good at that stuff. So I'll never have to do it.
I'm doing brakes and rotors, and it's like they've made it pretty easy. Like it's pretty Lego-y, at least on the Subaru. But the I was looking in there and I was like, oh, all the rubber and all the stuff is looking pretty rough now. So I was like looking at that, trying to get an idea of what it's going to be like to change all those bushings. I don't think that's me. That may be my limit. I got a hard and fast rule about anything that involves a torque wrench. I think the torque wrench is my limiter. Like if it needs a torque wrench, I'm done. Professional.
Right.
I always worked on the general assumption that the people at the car dealership would be as frustrated with me working on my own car as I get with my customers working on their own guitars.
Is there like a cutoff? Like you probably don't mind if a customer adjusts the truss rod or something like that, though, right? Like
depends on what they adjust it with.
Yeah. Some people are just not. The third dimension is not their thing,
Well, John Abercrombie, rest his soul. When we first started working on guitars for him, I got a panicky phone call from him on a Sunday afternoon. Can you meet me in the shop? Which wasn't hard for me because the shop was in the house at the time. But he calls up. He says, I'm thinking that installing a strap button shouldn't be this hard. I've got to be doing something wrong. I said, well, all right, come on over. Because I need this for a gig tonight, and I decided to put a strap on this guitar because somebody had just given him a guitar. He wanted to use it for that job. It was a Gibson that they were letting him try for like an endorsement deal or something, but it didn't have a strap button where he liked them on the heel. So he comes in with the guitar, and I take the guitar out of the case, And the strap button is, of course, twirling, in the air on a basically a deck nail that's sticking about that far. And he says, he says, it was a point where I just decided I shouldn't keep going.
Yeah.
So what were you using? Is a hammer? So I guess it depends on what they use.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dane Kings. Special guest today, Doug Proper. I'm going to tell you about something so that Doug can get some free stuff of it. This is a new sponsor for IHG. Whenever I have a guest, because I tell you about this stuff, Acoustic Coffee Company, they're going to send my guests free coffee. So Doug's getting free coffee today. And you might ask yourself, what
Green went out on you.
makes coffee an Acoustic Coffee Company? They use the finest sets of Brazilian rosewood to roast these beans. So you should know they've spared no expense.
We can't see you anymore, Ian.
Oh, hold on a second.
Gotta read to the commercial.
All right.
Yeah.
This is Ian Dalvin for Acoustic Coffee Company. I liked it so much I bought the company. Okay. So for everybody that was here for round one, we got a very thorough explanation of shellac and its many forms and some use scenarios for all of its many forms and how to mix it up and all that kind of stuff. So without any further ado, let Doug take it to phase two, which I'm assuming is anointing guitars with the shellac.
Yeah, it's getting it out of the bottle and onto the guitar.
Okay.
Before we jump in, has anybody tried their hand at mixing their own shellac from the last session that we did? Or I'm assuming there's some people here that are French polishers already. But I was curious if anybody had any questions regarding the first session before we jump into the rest. If anybody does, they could put it in the chat or just unmute. And like I said, this to me is more of a conversation rather than a presentation. But if anybody has, just to unmute and say hey. Getting shellac on a guitar is not that big a deal. I mentioned last time that I am as far from a traditional French polisher as you could possibly get. I'm more of a practical, I take more of a practical approach to it for the purposes of doing repairs on guitars, and not as a substitute for spraying, but you can use it for a substitute for spraying in a lot of circumstances that a lot of shops would assume it wouldn't be good for. So I very often I'll grab for the bottle of shellac as often as I'll grab for a rattle can or turn on the compressor. And it depends on the circumstance with a particular guitar and what the particular repair is. I've grown used to it over the years. So it's as much a tool in my toolkit of finishing options as anything else in the shop. Traditionally, putting shellac on a guitar or a piece of furniture for that matter is done by the process of French polishing, which is where it gets its name from. It's actually a process of putting shellac on an instrument or a piece of furniture rather than a finish. It describes the process of rubbing on the finish onto an object. When you'll see here, I'll try to demonstrate here. You'll see traditional French polishes. Oh, by the way, just another note is that the mixing chart, along with a bunch of list of suppliers and such, had been posted on Ian's Patreon. So that's all there if people are looking for it. So traditionally, putting the finish on an instrument is done by what we would call a polishing pad. The French use the word tampon, and then us Americans giggle. And then the British folks started calling it a rubber, and us Americans giggled more. So we just generally call it a polishing pad. A furniture French polisher will take some kind of cloth, whether it be a cheesecloth or cotton or something like that, and they'll take and I'm just going to show you what's traditionally done for the purposes of being able to show you and then ignoring it, because it's not probably the most appropriate way for us to deal with it on a guitar. But just so you see what's typically done, they'll take a wadded up piece of cotton or cloth or cheesecloth or something like that, and they'll fold it into about a square of about yay big, and then they start turning in the corners to make this look like a pretty tight little mouse with a point at the front of it. And they'll continuously fold in corners until they get a little bit of a bald shape that has a very flat surface over here, and then kind of a little point up at the corner. And it's a pretty tight ball. And then they'll take what cloth they're going to use to polish, drape it over the top, twist it around the back, and that becomes their polishing pad, or their whatever they want to call it. This is traditionally how it's done for two reasons. One, because to get the finish into the pad, they will open up the pad, pour in whatever finish they're using, shellac obviously, or whatever mixture of whatever cut they're using, along with some alcohol to do what they're calling charging the pad, which is this part. And then the cover is then wrapped over it, and they can wipe on finish onto a piece of furniture. This is great if you're refinishing a dresser, if you're refinishing even a piano. This is terrible for a guitar. So anytime you see a video describing that, I would personally avoid it. But that's just so you can see what traditionally is done. So as we begin to talk about how to make a pad, how to put a finish on the guitar, and what to use with it, a couple of points I wanted to make, reiterating some stuff from last time, is that you should be using fresh shellac, 3 months or younger in terms of its mixture. I'll show you again. This is now 2 months in the mixing, and it's still not dissolved. This is old shellac that's been the dry shellac that's been sitting on the shelf for probably about 5 or 6 years. So make sure you're mixing it fresh. It's not hard to mix. We mixed some at the end of the last session, showing a straight mixture as well as a mixture with resins. I think we used Sanderac and some gum. We used the mastic gum, Sanderac, this was the Sanderac, this was the gum. And one of the things I wanted to make sure everybody saw in terms of the difference was when you mix fresh shellac, this is a pretty light shellac, this is a platina, it's pretty clear. When you mix Sanderac or gum into it, you can notice it gets a little darker and it gets a little less clear. That's the gum is in the mixture, and it's a little bit cloudier to see through when it's in its liquid form. It doesn't really affect it much when it's going on, other than the Sanderac getting you a little bit harder finish, and the gum being a little bit of a plasticizer in terms of the build and how flexible the finish is. So if you're using resins in your shellac, you have to filter it a few times. And I don't remember if I had said that last time, but after it's diluted into your shellac, I'll run it through your typical strainers, and I'll run it through. I'll run it from one bottle into the next a few times just to make sure I get all of the contaminants out, because there will be, depending on the supplier of whatever resin you're getting, there will be some contaminants in there that you want to filter out of it, and then make sure it's not floating around in your finish and then on your guitar, underneath the finish, and you'd only notice it later when it's dry. So typically speaking, you would typically want to strain your shellac anyway after you mix it at least once, because it wasn't necessary, depending on who you're getting it from and the supplier, they're not particularly as careful as you would want them to be. So we're going to move on to making a pad. We have to talk about some ingredients of what you're going to be doing when you're putting it on. So if you want to switch the pin to the table, we can look at that. So I'll turn the tablet, the computer towards the table, so hopefully you can still hear me. Is the volume okay over here?
I think we're good. Sorry, I was double muted.
That's all right. So when we're talking about putting a finish on, we're talking about using a polishing pad to do so. I have a little box that I keep right next to my French polishing station that I keep all of my accoutrement in to keep it clean and keep it away from everything. Inside, typically, I'll have some kind of cotton. You can use gauze pads. You can use just regular cotton balls if you want. Somewhere. You can, if you would like, purchase cotton waste and use that. I don't have a particular preference. Whatever you use just has to be absorbent. To me, the material inside for the inside of the pad is of little importance as long as it's something that's as absorbent. You get a feeling for what you like. I've grown to like gauze just because it's easily moldable. But I use cotton as much as I use gauze. What I was mentioning before about traditional French polishers when they make their polishing pads, one of the things you'll see an awful lot is you'll see traditional French polishers have a little jar somewhere that lives in their shop where they, after they're finished polishing, they'll take that middle section that's soaked with shellac and what have you out of the outer wrap, stick it in a jar, pour in either some solvent or what have you, cover it, and they hold on to it like it's a pet. And some people, I presume, hold on to them long enough that they give them a name. I'm very big into disposable French polishing, which is why I do the things the way I do. So if we look at making our pad, to me, the most important part of the pad outside of the shellac is the cloth you're using on the outside of the pad. I use muslin. I like it a lot. You don't have to use muslin, but I've grown to particularly enjoy it. It's porous enough to really allow the shellac to come through the cloth, but it's not so loose that it gets messy. You could use, I've seen people use just an old bed sheet where they tear it up into small pieces if you want to do that, or t-shirt material, or you can use almost anything you'd like for the outer cloth. I find and have found from trial and error that if I'm choosy about what I use on the outside, my French polishing comes out a lot better. I'll typically take a bunch of cotton, whether it be gauze or cotton balls. I'll drape a cloth over my hand and I'm keeping a hole, and I'll pretend I'm a magician at a children's birthday party, and I'll make this disappear into my hand, into a ball underneath. Make sure the ball is good and tight and it's good and flat right in here. You can experiment with the size of your pad depending on what you're French polishing. If you've got a big 18-inch guitar that you're polishing the back on, and you want to get much more finish on it, you can go with more cotton and wind up with a bigger ball. Then I'll twist the head, and I keep in my little box of stuff for this a little box, a little tin, or a little a little Tupperware thing of rubber bands in Tupperware so they'll dry out. And I'll take a rubber band and I'll wrap the rubber band around the head to make a little Casper the Friendly Ghost. And you have a nice little pad that you can rub for your finish on with.
Doug, what are some of the other materials that you've used to that you've experimented with? I heard people talking a big game about silk at one point. Is that something you
Talking about? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I heard people talking about using silk at one point for French polishing.
Yeah, I've tried silk, but it really, I guess it depends on how tight its weave is.
Yeah.
You know, like anything else. I mean, when I first started doing this, I was just, cutting up bed sheets.
Yeah.
And I found the more expensive the bed sheet, the less good it was for French polishing, because, it didn't allow, it was such a tight weave that it didn't allow much of the shellac through, squeezing through the pad.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll mention about the material itself is that the pattern of the material is extremely important. If you cut up an old t-shirt and it's one of those t-shirts that have almost like a ribbed texture to it, or if you look at some bed sheets or something like that that have a very hatched pattern, you'll press that into a guitar finish and you can leave that kind of pattern, especially if you're going lengthways. If you have ribs in the pattern of the cloth, you can be basically leaving ridges in your finish that are going to be harder and harder to get out.
Yeah.
So that's why I've messed around with I've messed around with the cloth that I use, and I've settled in on muslin just because to me it's the perfect density of the weave to let everything through. I will, and if you see here, sometimes, like I said, I'll use gauze, especially after we got that dental tool haul. We had a boatload of gauze that came with it, so it was perfect to use.
If you guys are cutting stuff up from around the house to try to make your own tampons, the kind of like lint free is definitely, you don't want linty fabrics. And yeah, that pattern is like as smooth a pattern, like a high thread count sheet would probably be better than a low thread count sheet.
Yeah, I don't know if you pick this up, but muslin has a nice smooth pattern to it. It is lint free. If you're making a larger pad, it's just a matter of stuffing a lot more material down in there, and you can get a pretty good sized pad.
Doug, where are you sourcing that muslin from? Are you going to like Joann's Fabrics or anything? Or?
Yeah, I just you can go to Walmart. You go to up in the Northeast here, we have a place called Calico Corners that I bought a lot of. I actually don't know if they survive the 2020 business. But that's where I bought a lot from. I have
Grace wants to know what dimensions your kind of your prepped sheets are there.
this is my current stock. So I bought enough for a good long while at one point. So so in terms of dimension, typically I'll just, a 6 by 6 inch by 6 inch square. I will cut them smaller, depending on what I'm doing. And I'm going to show you one of those next, only because when you're French polishing, say if you're French polishing the face of an acoustic guitar, and you have a bridge to negotiate around, or even an arch top where you have F holes to negotiate, you might want to make little baby ones by comparison. You can see how small that is. I will make, I typically will sit, when I know I'm going to be doing a fair amount of French polishing, I'll sit down and make up a whole mess of them and just leave them waiting for me. And you'll see why in a second, in terms of how disposable they are. Because to me, it's the ultimate disposable item, because I have no interest in keeping shellac around in a jar for weeks. It doesn't take that much to charge a pad with fresh shellac, especially if I'm messing with colors, and I'm messing with different finishes, or if I'm messing with different additives. That can really mess with the pad and mess with the concentration of shellac inside the pad. So if I get a really small one going here, give it a little pounding.
Speaking of being disposable, the contents that you might add to your shellac and the ingredients of the wraps themselves, all of this should be compostable, except for maybe the elastic band, would you guess?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could read
All
everything.
food grade kind of stuff, right?
Natural cotton. Certainly shellac is one of
Doug,
those.
do you think if somebody was a pad saver, are you on the clock with your pad like you would be with a jar of shellac? Like, can you?
Well, yeah, but typically speaking, especially when you see what we're going to be doing with it, the surface here is all important.
Yeah.
If you start using pumice stone or rotten stone in your shellac, when you start messing with oils, when you start messing with all of that stuff, the condition of your pad will tell you when it's time for a new pad. There are times where, depending on what I'm doing with a guitar, I'll have a large pad going, a medium pad going, and a small pad going for different things. Or if I'm, if everybody's seen the videos of the D'Angelico, I got that nice kind of golden, kind of ambery yellow going on there.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily done with shellac alone. Some of that was done with dye in the shellac. So I might have a pad going with dye on it. I might have another pad going with just clear on it, depending on what I'm doing. Or if you saw the Gretsch that I had to fix the fingerprints on a couple of months ago, there was, I was using orange dye in shellac to do the touch up. And, so some pads were colored, other pads were clear. Some pads were loaded with pumice stone, where others I didn't want that much on it. The objection I personally have to saving pads is just how messy it is. If I'm, to me, I'm kind of a neatnik to begin with. So if I'm here making a pad up, and then, like I said, what traditionally would take place is somebody would pour finish into the pad here. To me, that's a recipe for disaster, because it's hard to control exactly how much you're pouring in, and it's hard to be aware of it. And then if you get too hot a pad, you wind up with a pad that's bleeding too much shellac into your finish and getting too wet. And then, a lot of French polishers will do exactly what we're doing.
So
but not-
you're
but not-
charging your pad from the outside, correct?
Well, I'm charging it from the outside. You'll see my trick for
Okay.
that.
Hold on one second, Doug. Frank, did you want to interject something?
Well, I just was trying to type here, but I haven't figured out how to do the chat thing.
Oh, okay. Well,
Sorry about that.
We can take it verbally.
I was just going to suggest though that I like the old guitar, the used guitar polishing cloths, the microfiber ones.
Microfibers, yeah.
They're absolutely bulletproof. You can rinse them out with shellac later and keep them. You don't have to do anything. And I just use folded up paper towels inside.
Do you have a brand of microfiber you like?
And I use what people leave in their guitar cases.
So you heard it here, people. Case Candy microfiber. That's the hot tip.
Just if it's the microfiber stuff and it's basically scrap around the shop, that's what I use it for.
Yeah.
Failing that, if it's a really quick job, some while ago I discovered Kim wipes. I don't know if you know Kim wipes.
No,
But,
Are they related to white balls?
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
They're paper, but they're absolutely amazingly bulletproof.
okay.
All right.
They're a paper towel sort of thing that's this as thick as a Kleenex, but it doesn't deteriorate or soften at all in water.
Oh, cool.
Cool.
So for, what I'll see a lot of French polishers do is they'll do this without the rubber band. And then when they want to recharge the pad, or when they want to, get the fresh section of their cloth, they'll just take the wad that's on the inside, move it to another section of the pad, rewrap it and what have you. But for me, I'm getting shellac all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's always been my objection, just because I'm a neatnik about this. And I've seen too many times, whether it's, dealing with epoxy or dealing with acetone or dealing with shellac or dealing with lacquer, when you're touching a guitar at different places, a lot of times inadvertently you're leaving trails.
Fingerprints.
And you're making a mess of things. To me, that's why I've always just done it with a rubber band. So, and then I close it up. And like I said, if I'm going to be getting into some repairs where I know I'm going to be doing a lot of French polishing, I'll just take out my little tub here, stuff, and I'll mix up plenty. Or if I notice that it's getting dry in here, that it's getting fewer and fewer, I'll just mix them up, and I'll just keep that covered. And I've got my whole kit that I can just put next time my polishing station, and I'm good to go. So that's how I approach that. Now, how we use it is going to involve a discussion of two things. But I think to answer Grace's question, this is just a 6-inch by 6-inch that I cut myself from my main group of my main bolt of muslin, and I just keep some of that tucked away in my kit here, and I'm ready to go whenever I need it. So
Am I moving spotlights? Do I go to faux sharing now?
not yet. I'll show you over here. Now we have to get shellac.
You also look like you're ready for Halloween there. A little Halloween diorama.
Yeah. When I'm using shellac, whether I'm doing it for touch-up or whether I'm doing it for French polishing, I have a little, depending on the size I need, I have a little bit of alcohol sitting close by for cleanup. Over at and I'll bring you over for a second. Over at my French polishing station here, I have a little tray set up with all of the things I need. I've got.
Doug, your audio is dipping a little bit.
The volume is bad.
Yeah.
Let me turn this. See if it helps.
There we go.
So, you know, I have everything I need here to do my French polishing or whatever I'm doing down here. I'll transfer my whatever shellac I'm mixing to different jars. I have my alcohol for cleanup, my alcohol for polishing. I've got different oils and what have you, which we'll talk about in a second. And basically all of the crap that I need sitting right up here, you know, waiting for me to get.
Doug, do you want to take a second and just name each one of those? Just
Name each one of what?
of your jars there, of what you got on your station.
Sure.
I see a lot of different colors.
Yeah, most of this is just shellac. This is a, you know, a white or a platina shellac.
Uh-huh.
More of it here. There's more of it there. There's a little bit, these are super blonde. These are blonde. Here is a shellac that's a 2-pound cut. There's your beige shellac. Here is amber shellac. Here is another amber. Over somewhere here was.
And what are your?
This is blonde. This is Sharon named it S&M blonde
Uh-huh.
because it's got Sanderac and mastic in it. Here I've got different colors of shellac, but this is shellac that's been mixed with a dye, in this case amber. I've got brown back here. I've got garnet here. And so sometimes I'll leave some shellac that I'm going to mix with a dye if I'm going to be using that. And then I've got 3 different oils that I use here. And then I've got the alcohol for cleanup. And then, you know, there's some pumice stone. So that's, you know, it's just a caddy for me to be able to keep everything with everything else. And especially if I want to move to another bench, I could just grab the whole caddy, pick it up and move rather than having to move 100 different bottles. Before we start loading up, now that I mentioned it, I want to demonstrate what's going on with what I had just mentioned, because we talked last time about different colored shellacs. You can use a dark shellac, which was garnet, and I did that little test where we put cloth in each one and we were able to see what the actual color of them were. Even though garnet is indicating that it's kind of a reddish shellac, it's really just, all of them are different degrees of amber, darker and darker and darker. But if I wanted to mix dyes, whether it be for touch up or whether it be for French polishing, here I can even put, we'll grab some of these. Like a red mahogany, here's blue. Of course, there would be like a vintage amber. If you want to mix dye into your shellac, now here I'm just doing it for the purpose of demonstration. Normally I'd count.
Brian wants to know about your about the cart with the shelves that you're using. Is that a Costco thing?
No, these we found at Pier 1 when they went out of business. We just
Pier 1. Ooh.
boatload of their fixtures. So, you know, you could shake up your shellac with different colors in it. Where was my red? We got them for a ridiculously little bit of money. We really scored. We got like, I think we had like 15 of them.
call that about seven drops?
Yeah, I'm really not counting on these just because I may mix up a few little tiny vials for the purposes of demonstration,
Uh-huh.
you know. Now, you probably want to label them because they're really hard to tell once you're in the jar. But if we a little bit of that t-shirt material we were playing with last time. Like SPs and strip of the cloth.
Doug, what can you give think about use scenario for trans tint in the shellac when that might come up?
Sure. You can see how deep a color you can get. If I'm French polishing, depending on what I am, if I've got, say, an old, now, a lot of times I'm doing French polishing and repairs, but there are very often that I'm doing it as part of a refin on a guitar from, you know, if I've got a guitar where I've done a lot of binding work on it, or an old Harley guitar where I'm kind of taking it back down to the raw finish. You can see there, kind of a deep mahogany. You can get pretty dark. You can get as light as you want. You can get as dark as you want. You can get cherry red. You can, whatever the trans tints are, you can add that to there, so that you can massage the color as you're going. If I'm French polishing a guitar top or back or sides, and I want a little bit more, you know, of a ruddy brown, or if I feel that the guitar is getting a little bit too red in the French polishing, I can just add a little bit of green tinted shellac to my pad, and the microscopic film that you're continuing to wipe down, you can really massage the color. The video I recently posted of French polishing the back of the D'Angelico, you can see that the guitar started pretty almost pale white, and by the end of the 45 minutes, we had a luxuriously, you know, kind of blonde finish to it, and that was all done with adding different colors to my pad via tinting, you know, little jars of shellac as I go. Now, you're probably not going to find something where you do a lot of blue, but if you wanted to mess with finishes, if you're putting on a fresh finish on a guitar, you could very well, if you wanted to, you could easily sunburst the guitar with French polishing if you're careful with the colors.
Doug, can you add pigments to French polish too, or does that not work?
That doesn't work very well because it's a suspension that just kind of gets very opaque very quickly. I use pigments when I'm doing touch-up under French polish, and we're going to actually do a bit of that in part 3. We've got a bunch of good repairs lined up where we're going to be showing French polishing in actual repair settings, you know, in terms of touching up cracks or touching up, you know, parts of different types of typical repairs that you would run into. But that's just a quick example of how you can add different colors to your French polish if you're looking to massage a color a little bit more red, a little bit yellow, a little bit more brown, and you can effectively change the color depending on what your desires are. A lot of times when you got an old guitar that you might have like a 1900 parlor guitar where you've had to sand it all the way down to, raw wood on the top. Just blow a lot of finish on it with lacquer, it's going to look like a new guitar. But you can't really massage the color easily when you're spraying as it's coming out of the gun. To me, it's much easier to massage the color and move it in a direction gradually while you're French polishing. So now it's time to load our pan and start putting finish on. So I'll use, and I'm going to use some of the alcohol, and I'm going to use some shellac. I use syringes for this. I'll load up one syringe with some alcohol. One syringe with whatever shellac I'm looking to use. Not a ton, but this is for me how, depending on what pad I'm going to use, how I'm going to get finish inside the pad. I'll start with a little bit of alcohol, and I'll just inject right into the inside of the pad and the cotton in there. And I'll go until I start to feel the coolness on the pad, that I can feel the alcohol penetrate. I don't want it too wet, but I want it a little bit charged. Then I'll take my shellac and I will charge the pad with shellac. It keeps it neat, nice and clean. I get a good amount of shellac in there, and feel it cool to the touch. And you can see, if you keep a pad nearby, you can see if it's starting to penetrate through to the cloth. It is. Now I think we're going to move over. If you want to pin, you want to just pin one of them, like we got two of them.
I'm seeing a guitar back. Is this the one we're supposed to have?
We got two guitar backs. We got this one, and we got this one.
Which one do you want? Wide angle or close up?
It's up to you. You can do that's fine, I think.
No, it's nice. It's got more of you in it. This is nice.
So now that my pad's somewhat charged, I don't know how much of the bench you can see, but I'll keep a pad right on the bench next to me, so I can use the pad off. A lot of times you'll see French polishers padding it on the back of their hands. I don't want to wind up at the end of the job with shellac all over it. Well, so sure, again, I have it. Keep staying, keeping lids on my stuff.
Doug, is this a practical application, or is this just a guitar that you can?
This this belongs to us. This is a loaner guitar that came back with a bunch of belt buckle rash, and it had a crack over here. All of that's repaired. Now it's ready for just brightening up the finish again. I sanded it down up to 400 grit, so it's nice and smooth.
Yeah, can we talk about the prep before French polish? Do you have is 400 grit like a normal opening gambit for a repair?
For
prep?
me, I like 400. I've done, I've messed with that. If I get too more aggressive than that, down 320, 220, I find that leaves too many ridges in the finish that I have to let the shellac fill, and there's too many scratches.
Are you?
If I go much finer than that, 600 or 800, I'll find that the finish is a little bit too shiny for a tooth, you know.
So you do need a little bit of something for the shellac to grab onto, just an abrasion
Yeah,
to,
and shellac will stick to almost anything.
yeah.
Almost anything will stick to it. I quickly show you one of the guitars.
When you're abrading it, do you have a preferred sanding pattern? Like, would you go mostly with the grain, or are you doing kind of a random?
Mostly going with the grain. You know, if we look at this real quick, you see a really kind of messy guitar. This is a crash dummy guitar that we'll be using next time. And I wouldn't hesitate to polish right over this.
Okay.
You got a guitar comes in, it looks like somebody's used it for, you know, for badminton practice. But if I'm actually in the process of repairing a guitar where like we had the crack over here, I'll take the time to finish for myself, so I'll have a better, you know, a better ending product. Still have a charged pad. It's not charged very heavily. It's got probably about 50% alcohol in it, 50%. And
Salud.
start wiping on the finish lengthwise. And you can see, because of the current high concentration of alcohol, you can see that dissipating and drying almost immediately. And that is just a demonstration to see, you can see the vapor trails as they're evaporating. You put shellac on, you're putting a microscopic thin coating of shellac on something.
So even though it really appears that it's disappearing, you are actually applying shellac to this, correct?
If you look close, you can see, start to see.
Hold on one second. Let me switch over to this guy. Hold on. I almost got it. Can you go? Yeah, hit that again.
You can almost see streaks of shellac.
Okay, cool.
Excuse me, I may have missed this, but what kind of wood is that, and are the pores filled?
Yeah, this is already pore filled, because this, like I said, this was a guitar that we repaired.
Okay.
Here, and we
All
had
right.
a couple of rags and what have you. This is a mahogany.
All right.
And
So, and
that already has a lacquer type finish on it.
that already lacquer under there. It might be poly. I don't know what it is, but
Okay.
whatever shellac is going to stick to it. This is just for me to see that the pad is, you know, expelling whatever's inside of it evenly. And then from there, and I can feel the pad against my fingers, against these finger cuts. I can feel it cool to the touch, and I can feel the liquid in the pad. From there, I continue to feed the pad from the outside of the pad rather than continuing to inject it in. So here you can see, I don't know if you can see the bubbles or not, but you can see that the pad is taking in shellac more and more. And before I put it on the guitar, I keep my pad nearby, my little pad, and I'll tap just to make sure it doesn't have too much on the outside. You don't want too wet the pad here. Now, putting it on, the same thing is happening, but you can see it's leaving a little bit more finish behind, because it's I'm now mixing in more fresh shellac, so there's going to increasingly be a heavier mixture from shellac or of shellac as compared to the alcohol that's in the pad.
And there's no oil at this point?
There is no oil.
No oil at the, Doug, can we talk about your motion there? I see you getting your body into that quite a bit too. Like it's not all arm.
It's not all arm. I'm moving like just rocking from toe, you know, from leg to leg. Because what's going on here is I don't want to, and I'll demonstrate it for you even where we're at this stage. The most important aspect of any kind of French polishing that you do is that this pad never stops on the guitar.
Ooh,
That's a disaster waiting to happen.
you just gave me anxiety.
Because that'll stick and create, you know, a blemish in the finish, which it already has. I mean, that's now stuck on
Why
there.
would you do that?
Well, the benefit, the nice thing about French polishing is that that's terribly easy to fix. In fact, while you're French polishing, you can affect different repairs to different parts of the finish. I can show you very quickly as well. Hopefully one of the candidates will have for next month. Is this. You have all sorts of stuff going on there that, to me, this is a French polish repair all day long. And that'll come up to the point where it almost looks like a freshly.
Is that somebody's overspray that isn't Ontarian, or what? Or is that just a water damage?
The water damage.
Water damage. Okay.
But when we're done French polishing this, it'll look like somebody freshly sprayed it. You know, 50 years ago.
That's exciting.
But,
Have you messed around with amalgamator, the Mohawk amalgamator?
I have not. As I don't know what's in that.
Some of those exotic alcohols, I think, but I know that Mohawk's recently changed it, so people that the 3 people that I know that can actually make amalgamator work say it's more difficult to make it work now, but just curious.
Sure. So, you know, here I am just putting polish on with the pad. The motion, as I had mentioned before, the worst thing you ever want to do is have that stop somewhere. So while you're moving, typically speaking, you don't want to stop, because as soon as you stop, you get stuck to the finish and you'll wind up with a blemish that's harder to get out. It's not impossible to get out. And at this early stage of putting on finish, we're not wreaking havoc. But when I'm putting on the finish, when I'm wiping on the finish, if you could imagine a plane coming to land on the water, like a water type of plane, one of those planes that land in like Alaska or something. I'm coming down, landing on the finish, gliding across it, and as I come up, I take off again. So, yeah, so I'm not ever stopping on the guitar. And my initial gambit for putting finish on the guitar is just to follow the grain and wipe it on to start to get coverage, and I can start to see that there's finish everywhere. And I can also feel the pad to feel how much it's dragging, because right now it's not dragging very much. It's still going on pretty silky smooth.
Can you explain dragging really quick? Like
yeah, well, as shellac begins to build on a finish, of course, every time you see me passing by the finish here, every time you see it wipe on, and I don't know if it's picking it up in the camera.
It is.
You can see that vapor trail of finish that I'm leaving behind. Every time you wipe on, you're leaving behind a trail of finish that begins to dry almost immediately because it's so microscopically thin. And you are building on top of it. But as it starts to get thicker and it's still, you know, has solvent in it and it becomes more of a finish, you're going to feel this begin to drag as if it's got friction to it, as if it's getting a little sticky. And that's where oil is going to come in on a finish.
So how much would you say without oil that you've, I mean, it's probably microscopic, but you've probably put some on here, right?
Yeah, we already have a finish on here. If I scratch my fingernail with it, I could probably scratch through it. In fact, I just did.
Carl, amalgamator is not butyl solve. It might It might have some Cellusolve in it, maybe. But I can't imagine they would put Cellusolve in something that you would use
Yeah, I'm not a big
on a
fan.
pad, though.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of using a lot of stuff in shellac that isn't already natural.
Yeah.
Before we go any farther, I always keep a rag near the neck. So if I'm holding the guitar, I'm not holding it with a shellac filled.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to transfer shellac anywhere on the guitar that I don't want it.
That's a good idea.
Tape off areas. You'll also notice here, it's worth mentioning that my setup, you see the whole thing there, my setup has the guitar suspended above the bench.
Uh-huh.
That's on purpose, for a very important reason. If I'm French polishing a whole guitar, when I'm done, and if I were just having it on the bench, you can do that if you'd like. If I have the guitar on the bench and I'm French polishing and then it's time to French polish the face, that's a recipe for disaster as well.
You get furry.
Yeah, you're gonna wind up with stuff all in your finish, or you're gonna mar up your finish. So, you know, the whole idea of being able to keep a guitar suspended above the bench so that when I'm time to do another side, that I can have the guitar suspended.
Well, I bet you love the Total Vise for French polishing.
Yeah, and it's great for that. I
Just spin
still-
that thing around and around and around.
that traditionally will still pretty much stay there. And this is jigged pretty well if I strap the guitar headstock in.
Doug, how do you make that wedge thingy that you got on there?
This is just a half a box.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
With cork on it. So that, if I decide to then flip the guitar for the purposes of polishing, I can do that, and I'm really only touching the guitar in 2 spots here.
Yeah.
There are other fixtures that I use for that purpose as well. If I want to be able to, very often I'll finish French polishing the back and I'll go do something else in the shop.
Yeah.
And then I'll go back and I'll do the face later, or I'll do the sides after, or I'll take a break and have a cup of coffee. But if I wanted to do a lot of polishing, utilize parts of the guitar that are already there, give yourself a handle. You can easily make a little jig.
Uh-huh. I like where this is going. So rotisserie.
Yeah, exactly. So here, that'll still hold the guitar pretty solid. Now I have to hold it with my hand because it's sitting on a spindle. I actually don't have the headstock strapped in, which I should.
Did you taper that dowel so that it fits in there like an end pin?
No, actually this is just a handle of one of my old paintbrushes.
Uh-huh. Okay. It does look tapered though.
You don't throw anything away.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's
Depending on the height of the guitar, I've got a number of different holes I can use to suspend the guitar in.
mhm.
And this way, when it comes time to flip the guitar over, I can just do that. And I can French polish the face.
Cool.
Here, I can French polish the side. And I've got the guitar suspended above the bench at all times, so.
Should I switch camera angles?
Oh, let me put this back over here. So, before we continue to just get to put finish on,
Can I interject about your body motion there for a second?
yes,
In my experience, French polish looks better too. The closer you keep your pad movement to the grain lines, and you run out of like you run out of parallelness with your arm pretty quickly, and so like keeping your body, adding your body as part of the stroke really gives you more ability to stay parallel with your grain lines in my estimation.
I don't know which camera you're looking at. So as you're putting finish on, I'll start to feel it drag. Remember, I'm landing and I'm taking off. And you can even see there that the pad begins to want to drag. You can see that it's starting to feel sticky. So I know I'm starting to get a little bit of a build. It's time to start talking about oil with the finish. Oil is a terribly important part of French polishing.
Can I ask you about the oil now?
Yes.
Is this to kind of like speed the process along? Like if you were to let this sit overnight, would you come back and experience the same amount of drag?
Well, no, not after it's hardened, but by the same token, and we've been talking more than we've been polishing. So,
we've had a little curing, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so there would normally be a lot more shellac on this. And not so much as to speed the process, but to keep this pad from sticking. So the primary function of oil is as a lubricant.
Okay.
However, the discussion of oil is it's not really complex, but it's important to take place in French polishing. There are two kinds of oils in the world, generally speaking. There are drying oils and there are non-drying oils. And which one you use matters to your French polishing. A drying oil, for the purposes of our discussion, and I don't pretend to know or have a gigantic list of them, but we'd be talking about linseed oils, we'd be talking about tongue oils, walnut oil, poppy seed oil, stuff like that. Drying oils, as you're putting it on a finish, mix with the shellac. They do act as a lubricant, but they mix with the shellac, and because they're being exposed to air, especially in the process of polishing on, they become polymerized and become part of the finish. So you're talking about a hardening agent that some French polishers like for the purposes of adding body to a finish, adding thickness to it. It can give you a little bit of a deeper shine when you're polishing it on. Whereas non-drying oils, mineral oils, olive oil, almond oil, coconut oil, et cetera, those will not become part of the finish. Those are merely acting as lubricant. And as you're wiping on the finish and that finish is curing, that oil is penetrating through the finish and rising to the surface. You will see, if you use a non-drying oil, which I do, that you'll get a really great polish going. Leave it overnight, come back the next day, and it looks like there's this film over the top of the guitar, which there is, because all of that oil has penetrated through to the top and settled above the finish. You can literally wipe it off. You can use it to polish up the finish as a lubricant to continue to polish if you want to use pumice stone, if you want to use rotten stone as part of the polishing process, or if you just wanted to use your hand to polish up the finish. If you use a plastic polish like McGuire's plastic polish or Novus to polish after the shellac is hardened, you're literally taking that oil off. If you're French polishing a guitar with the intention of maybe as a last step during the repair process of blowing a finish on a very light misting coat of lacquer so that you can go over to a buffing wheel and really polish it up to get that factory fresh look. Kind of like what's the archtop company that make guitars in China?
Eastman.
Eastman, they deal with most of their guitars are a shellac finish that are rubbed on finishes that hand rub finishes that they later just spray one coat of lacquer on, hit it against a buffing wheel, and it looks like a finished guitar or a freshly finished guitar. But the type of oil you use is extremely important. Walnut oil is an oil I like for a drying oil. A non-drying oil of almond oil is good as well. Now, if you were to smell these and taste these, they would be very hard to distinguish from one another. But the effect of each one on your French polish is going to be dramatic. It really depends on what it is your intention is in a given case. And I'll use more walnut oil or more of a drying oil on some guitars that I'm looking to try to replicate, like a vintage hard finish on, say, like that Gretsch, for example, where I want it to look old. I want it to be, kind of have the shine of lacquer. I don't want a dull or satiny kind of French polished finish. I want a really deep shine that then I can manipulate later if I want to make it look a little bit old. We've got some tricks for doing that as well. But their walnut oil in my French polishing is going to become pretty important. Generally speaking, my opening gambit for using oil is just using a mineral oil. My favorite mineral oil for French polishing is just Johnson's baby oil.
Oh, and that smells nice too.
Smells good. It smells like babies.
Doug, can I ask you about your walnut oil experience? Back when I was trying my hand at French polishing, I used walnut oil, and even though it was a drying oil, I still got oil floating to the surface. Is that your experience with walnut oil too, or maybe I was using a different?
Well, depending on the oil you have, let's talk just a little bit about oils first in general. A lot of times, traditional French polishers, we will use a linseed oil, which is actually it's flaxseed, which is what linseed oil is. It's from the flaxseed. There, for example, you could have a recipe for disaster, because depending on how the linseed, even if it's raw linseed oil or boiled, raw linseed oil, of course, is going to take up to weeks to dry. And if that's part of your finish, the longer the oil takes to dry, the more difficult it is on the expectations of being able to get the finish in and out of here. A boiled linseed oil will still take 2 to 3 days to completely cure. And if you're looking to get the guitar off the bench, you're going to be dealing with oil that's not necessarily completely finished or not completely dry as part of the finish. So you're going to have some oils take much longer to dry, some oils take much shorter to dry. The other thing too is when you were using oil as part of your French polishing, were you mixing it into your shellac?
No, I was using it as an add-on to the pad as kind of PRN.
Polishers add oil to their mixture rather than adding it to their pad, and they wind up with too much oil in the mixture. You look at some, even like guys like Michael Dresner will take a can of like Zinsser, shellac and mix it with mineral spirits right in the shellac and put it all in the same jar and just squirt that all over his polishing pad. That's a different, you're talking mostly about furniture. And in those circumstances, it's a lot more forgiving because you've got a much, much bigger surface that you're just kind of wiping everything all over. For me, I always start with a mineral oil just because it's clean. It's just acting as a lubricant, and I want my initial build of shellac to just be shellac or be controlled by my my additives, the Sanderac or the mastic or whatever I'm adding to the finish in terms of its properties.
Doug, can I just ask you if you know on the drying oil stuff, like, is it grabbing the shellac molecularly and including it in the polymerization, or is it doing its own thing and the shellac is doing its own thing?
Well, generally speaking, oil polymerizes when it comes into contact with the air.
uh-huh.
So, typically speaking, then, if you have an oil that you leave open and it's all got oil all over the, the rim of whatever your container is, that gets super gummy because it's drying as it comes into contact with the air. If it's not actually becoming part of the shellac so much as it's adding an extra body of finish, and that's why some French polishers like it, because it adds extra, an extra layer of finish that's in there. My experimentation with drying oils is such that if I ever have any intention of putting anything but shellac on whatever I'm French polishing, I try to stay away from them, because once oil polymerizes, nothing will stick to it.
So you wouldn't want to use a drying oil if your intent was to shoot lacquer over the top of it.
I just shoot lacquer over the top of this. I'm just going to be using shellac with whatever additives I'm using for the purposes of creating a depth of a finish. So whether I'm using any kind of hardener or any kind of binder in the finish with all of the different kind of additives that we talked about.
Nice.
So generally speaking, my go-to is just a mineral oil, because it's clean. I'm not, I did, like, for example, on the D'Angelico that I just finished up, I did towards the tail end of that, on the top of everything, I did wind up using a little bit of walnut oil on my last few passes of French polish, because I wanted kind of a little bit of extra hardness on the outside of that sucker, because I wanted it to be, somebody who's not necessarily going to be taking out and putting it back in the case.
Any tips on like compatibility with the drying oils and some of the additives that you were going with? Like, once you add a third thing, like I'd be like, you got Sanderac and gum mastic and a drying oil. Is there cause for concern there at all?
Well, if you're mixing it all together, yeah. So for example, if I'm trying to build a finish by using Sanderac and gum as an additive to shellac, so it gets thicker quicker, I won't be using a drying oil at the time, because then I'm just adding more, I'm adding more to the mixture that could create a little bit of gumminess.
Yeah.
Plus, like I said, it really depends on which oil you're talking about. Some people use tongue oil. It's a drying oil. I wouldn't go near tongue oil with a French polishing job for as far as I could reach the guitar, just because with tongue oil, generally speaking, the warmer tongue oil gets, the stickier it gets, and it gets gummy because heat reacts with tongue oil. Well, if you're spending a lot of time polishing on a finish, you're creating a certain amount of friction here.
Yeah.
I don't want the unintended consequences of my finish getting gummy on me, and then I'm going to have finish adhesion issues. Plus, like I said, it depends on how the oil was processed. Oiled from different places, it's either, like, for example, linseed oil, even if it's a boiled linseed oil, before it's boiled, it's processed, or it's extruded from the flaxseed, either by pressing it out of the flaxseed or chemically removing it from the flaxseed through solvents. And that matters as well to an oil, how well the oil reacts to a particular set of circumstances or particular setting. You notice, by the way, the one oil that has not come up in our entire discussion,
Motor?
lemon oil.
Okay.
That's one of those oils that is more fiction than fact.
Were people hot on it for a minute?
Well, I don't know how much they were hot on it for French polishing, but very often we're seeing it used and described. If you spend any time on YouTube, you'll see lemon oil described as used on fingerboards as if it's some kind of cleaning agent, because the quote unquote citrus content of it act as a cleaner. Any oil you buy from, I don't care who, whether it be Stu Mack or Mitchell's or Homer Formby or the supermarket or the hardware store, any any lemon oil you can buy in the hardware store, just as a little bit of a hint or a little tip, actually doesn't have any lemon oil in it. All it is mineral oil with lemon scent added.
Ooh, that is a good tip.
Yeah, so there's no other than the lubricating quality of the mineral oil breaking up whatever gunk is on a fingerboard and its hydrating properties. It's actually, there's no citrus in it, so it's that's just an aside. So let's look at putting more finish on this puppy, and I'm just going to use some mineral oil. So I just feed the pad as much as I feel necessary, and I tap it off to make sure that we are, and all I do is put a drop of oil right on the pad. So a single drop is enough to give me a lubricating surface to allow the pad to skate a little bit better, and it's not as sticky. The harder you press, the more finish will come out. The lighter you press, the less finish will come out.
I would like to add that the harder you press, the greater your chances of having stoppage with your motion too, though.
Yes, that's part of the process with the lubricating oil.
So are you getting close at all to flying too close to the sun on this, or are you
Like I said, we're doing more talking than we are.
okay. I would like to see you fly too close to the sun and kind of show what that looks like.
Sure, and it's actually surprisingly hard to get there. If you usually get there when you have way too wet a pad.
Yeah.
But I'll always, after I feed the pad, I don't know which camera you're looking at, so I don't know if this is easy to see.
How were you deciding that it was time to feed the pad again? Was it what you were seeing coming off of it on the guitar, or a feel
We're also
thing?
doing a lot of talking, so I'm putting this down a lot, and we're chit-chatting, and then this is starting to get a little dry.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that it stays good and wet. So before I go and put any fresh lacquer on or fresh shellac on there, I just put another drop of oil. I'll hit the pad. Once I start to get a good finish everywhere, I stop lifting off and coming back down. Once I start to see that I've got a good covering where I don't have any areas where I have raw finish, I'll start making my motions. Figure eights work nice on a guitar. Circles. This is where you kind of really play little mind games with yourself, and because you really just have to have it become almost like a Zen type experience. And I'm just watching where I'm being on a guitar. Circles here, circles there, overlapping where I can, where I want to. I don't want to spend too much time in one spot. I want to work my way around the guitar. As soon as I start to feel a little drag, I might give myself just a pinch of oil again. I'm also watching the reflection of this against my light. If I move this light, here we go. See in the camera. If I move the light there, I can see the camera. But I'm also watching the reflection of the finish against the light. And I'm trying to see the little vapor trails go by. And I've got to hold the light in a different spot so I can actually see it. And now I start rubbing, and I'm not going to stop. Here again, if you do that, you stop, you're dead in the water, because now I've got an abraded area that's not going to look very good. The nice thing about shellac is that it's a wonderfully self-healing finish. That if I spend time going back over the area that I stopped, that will blend in nicely and not look like I ever even stopped. But the more you stop, the more difficult it becomes. So as you're going from figure eights here to circles, takes a little bit of planning that you don't, stop and then reverse in a direction. You don't want jerky motions. You want also looking at the quality of my surface to see if I get any, little areas that I forgot to fill, areas that I may have repaired, like over here. I'm gonna make sure that I don't see any wrinkles, any bumps, any scratches that are coming through.
Glare on the wall.
You want to, yeah, you want to take a second and take your mobile camera and just kind of like.
Why don't
Yeah.
you switch to the other one, the other view? That would be a good view. So there, give you an example of what I'm seeing when I'm looking into the light. The texture of this finish, you can see some of the streaks from where the finish is.
At this point, it's probably very tempting for people to work this and work this and work this, like trying to get rid of those streaks, right? Like.
Well, here's the thing. Now, if I'm going to just continue to talk while I polish, because we want to see what it starts to actually look like. So here, I'm starting to get a polish and I'm starting to get a build. I might switch to my finish with Sandarek in it. Now, here's where doing what I had done earlier, where I have different pads for different things. If I want to make sure I don't mix the two types of finish I'm using, I might go to another pad and start feeding that. Of course, I would do that first, like I did before. But if I was doing that, I would use less
You see what the lights,
alcohol.
looks like you have a big white blob in it.
Well, that's just the reflection of the lamp.
On the
Should
light.
I turn that off?
Let's see what happens if you turn it off.
Is that better or no?
Maybe.
We can't really see the patterns quite as well. Maybe if you got the light on it at an angle. I don't know if that's possible. That's pretty good right there. There's some good patterns. For everybody looking, the dead center of the lamp is not very instructive, but the outside area you can see his the pad.
So I'll spend a little time charging a pad with, this is now with Sandarek and gum. I might even take some.
So are those additives going to affect the dragginess of the pad?
No, they'll just, it will add some body to my finish. I'll show you what I'm doing here. Injecting the pad. Leaking through, so then I will heat the pad. And in a lot of cases, depending on what additive you're using, it'll take the place of another type of additive. So for example, Sandarek as a hardener will kind of function a little bit as a drying oil, like a walnut oil will, in terms of adding body, adding a little bit of hardness, but it's got the benefit of not being an oil. So also try not to keep too many open bottles on the bench. Really knocking one over. So here,
Evan is asking, are you charging a different pattern using? Oh, hold on a second. Are you charging a different pad or using these different shellacs in the same pad?
You could do either or. You could if you wanted, and there are times where it depends on my mood. That I will just, I will decide, oh, I want to start adding some Sanderac and gum into my polishing. So I would be using the same pad and then just add to that. But it depends on what my goals are. One of the things you'll find about French polishing, especially when you start messing with different aspects of the finish or additives or what have you, is that it's a lot like cooking. Different ingredients will have a different effect. And that's where practicing comes in. The Sanderac and gum, as we see what's going to happen here, you'll notice that I start getting shinier a lot quicker. A little bit deeper. Takes a few minutes, but you'll see it. And every once in a while, I'll go back to making sure all of those swirls that I'm putting in kind of self-level out by giving myself streaks that go with. And I go back to my figure eights and my circles. Small circles, sometimes I'll just go around the whole guitar on the outside. Bigger circles. Try not to spend too much time in one area because you can zone out and wind up with too much finish on one area and then uneven look if you're not paying attention. You
It
always
must
want
smell like an interesting combination of baby oil and booze in there right now.
one of the things you want to be conscious of while you're doing this, say on a flat top guitar, is what you're doing close to the edges. If you spend too much time on the edge of a guitar or you're polishing past the edge, it's very easy to get a line of finish around here that if you're not paying attention, you notice later and you have some cleanup to do.
Brian's wanting to know if part 3 is going to cover building a finish up from bare wood.
We can do that.
It seems like something that's been covered pretty extensively, but,
yeah,
we could do it for fun because it could come up in repair.
Yeah, and it does, especially if you're taking a guitar down to raw wood. I've got some raw backs or tops around here that I could demonstrate it with on an abbreviated fashion because I think the amount of time it takes to build that up would probably take up the whole session. Because what we've got going on for next time, we have some good repair type settings to use it on. We have an archtop guitar that has had a crack repaired on the side and the finish has been brought down almost to bare, and then we're going to do some touch up on the crack and then try to make that, it's got a cross grain crack that we're going to try to make disappear and then French polish over it. We have some kind of like I think it's a poly finished like Epiphone guitar where the bridge was lifting on it, so we have a crack, that typical crack that runs along the outside edge of the of a bridge reglue, as well as like when you're lifting a bridge and you get that inadvertent lifting of the finish of the bridge that requires touch up, but rather than doing it with like say super glue and then just having to try to buff up the whole guitar to try to get rid of witness lines, especially on poly, we're going to go over it with
Jacob wants to know if the water damage one is coming back for 3. I think
I'm going to try to get that one ready to do for June.
Okay.
Now,
That's the one that interests me like crazy because I've never seen very many good solutions for water damage. But
Well, a lot of that finish is gonna be flaked away.
Yeah.
And what we're gonna be doing with French polishing for that is we're gonna be replacing what flaked away, the flaked away areas of the finish and building that up around. So sometimes you'll change hands if you're a little bit ambidextrous. You can, switch to your other hand, holding the guitar on your makeshift handle on the butt.
How's your shoulder feeling?
That's fine. It's, this doesn't bother me. I could do this for hours. It's really not that strenuous.
One of my first jobs as an apprentice was the guy that I was working with sanded like a whole LG2 out with 600 grit and gave me a bottle of number 7 McGuire's and a baby blanket and said, bring this to a gloss. My shoulder is still to this day ruined from that. I was 23 when I had them.
So this is starting to look like it's got some finish on it. I don't know what it's looking like to there because I can't see it.
I see some good stuff.
So now you can still see some of those, you're still seeing those vapor trails every time I pass by in different, and that every little vapor trail is another microscopic layer of finish. But I want to start seeing if I can get rid of some of the texture we're leaving behind. You do that traditionally, you do that after you're done. You'll do what's called spiriting off, which means you wind up using more and more alcohol in your pad rather than shellac until in some cases you're using almost all alcohol. But you have to be very careful with that so you don't wind up pulling finish off, because you can easily, if your pad gets too sticky, you can easily pull finish off as you're wiping with your pad as easily as you would be putting it on.
Do you want to try to spirit off same
No,
day?
I'm gonna show you one more trick
Okay.
to be able to build the finish, and maybe I'll just jump to the other guitar and show you that.
Oh, do you have a guitar ready to spirit off?
No, I don't, but I'm going to show you that just what you can do with an arch top.
Okay.
So, where did I put? Oh, over here. This is pumice. Oh. This is pumice stone. This is rotten stone.
Mm-hmm.
The little faces are courtesy of Sharon. She makes them look like little members of the royal family, the Saudi royal family.
Ah.
So this is pumice stone, and it's in basically.
Oh, really quick, Trevor would like you to take the handheld and zoom over just kind of like roll it around around the guitar so we can kind of get a sense. It's a little hard because of the algorithm.
And you can see there's some texture because you can see the vapor trails in the.
Hey, Sharon, could you do me a favor?
Yes.
Could you grab your phone and snap a picture and email it to me, and I'll put it in. We can do a screen share. I think we'll get a better resolution of it.
You have the phone, Doug. Doug has the phone.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Oh, Sharon.
That'll be fine.
So, here is pumice stone, and all it is in like a salt shaker with a rubber band around it and a little bit of muslin on the top. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got a little bit of dust. And all I do is use it like a salt shaker. And I put it on the finish.
Which is coarser, rotten or pumice?
Pumice stone is coarser than rotten stone.
Okay.
The reason why I don't use rotten stone for what we're about to do is because it's black in color, or it's charcoal gray in color.
Okay.
And that will come up in your finish.
It'll
The
just
thing about
will
pumice,
it color the finish or just diffuse it?
it'll take the color of whatever finish you're putting it on. So if I'm putting on something that's deeper color, and I'll typically blow off the excess that's there, give myself a little bit more finish, sure I have my pad nearby. I'll use a couple of extra drops of oil just for an extra lubricant because the pumice stone is going to add a certain amount of friction. But now the pumice stone, you're going to see it get dull in the finish pretty quickly because the pumice stone is adding a certain amount of grit to the finish, but it's also leveling off all of those little ridges from whatever polishing I was doing, from unevenness of the pad or squeezing too hard or what have you. And you'll start to get a nice shine. You put more finish on, mix it with the pumice. And it's almost like doing your level sanding and adding finish at the same time. When I'm doing it, I will usually concentrate in an area. I have another one, which is just a cup, pumice stone. Same thing, smaller cousin. Put a little bit of finish on.
Larry wants to know what F your pumice is. Is that 4F?
Yes, 4F. So this is acting as an abrasive for me to kind of do my level sanding and a finish application at the same time. Here, it's very important to not stop because the pumice is acting as an abrasive. If you hit too hard, you'll abrade the finish, and then you have to just add more shellac to kind of finish over the top of that.
Is that pumice impregnating in the finish as well? I'm assuming, and that's okay.
It's becoming part of the finish. If we were finishing this if I was in the process of finishing this, which I am obviously, and I decided somewhere along the way that this is looking too clean to me, actually now you can start to see the shine that the pumice stone is allowing us to achieve, because a lot of the swirls are leveling out.
Carl sent me a text about butyl solute, which I'm gonna answer here because it's just easier. Carl, I don't use butyl solute just because it's always maybe I just am too messy in order to use it correctly, but I always found it was just too slow, too hot for me to deal with. Everything that I would do with butyl solute, I just use by incorporating a lot of retarder into my stuff. No. Sorry about that, guys.
Solid, something that I would mix with shellac. That's to my mind anyway. That's something that would be kind of strictly a lacquer thing.
We ran into some. There's Gibsons from the 30s that I don't know what it is about their lacquer, but like it is just nearly impossible to get anything to melt into it. And so we would hose, when I was at Grooms, we would hose these things down with Solusolve, and it was even impervious to Solusolve, but it was kind of in the rotation.
Yeah.
And I was just like it seemed like just minute quantities of Solusolve were leading to these kind of dramatic post-cure, like issues. I'm sure I probably overdid it, but.
So now I'm concentrating just in this area here. But if you remember, well, we weren't doing this at that time, but the early days of the switchover of manufacturers from shellac to lacquer, in the early days of lacquer, shellac was the primary resin in lacquer
Yeah.
until, you know, the 50s and 60s, where, you know, nitrocellulose was becoming the, you know, the primary additive in that time.
So I'm watching all the movement in that motion. It leaves like a trace of the same, I think is the pumice stone. Will that level out after drying?
I'm not sure what you mean by the leveling out after drying. Right now, this is
The marks you leave while polishing it?
I think, so are you talking about the marks that you see right here? Can you see my cursor? I don't know if you can see my cursor.
where you're talking about around the light.
Yeah, around the light.
Yeah.
Some of that is a little bit of oil that we're still seeing on the surface. In fact, if you look carefully, you can kind of see me.
Actually, where your hand is just now, I think is probably a better indication of what your finish actually looks like.
Probably, yes.
Over on the lower bout, we're getting a good reflection off of the top shelf there.
Yeah. You know, and this at this time, I'm still putting finish on. You can still see vapor trails with every single pass. You know, so I'm still building a finish even as I'm using pumice stone to level off certain areas that put a little bit of, I don't know if you can really see that.
So I think what we're kind of not getting to is that there's a day 2 to this process, or maybe even a day 3, and like really low, you know, like sheen is really a function of how flat and how, you know, like it's basically how flat it is, how reflective is it going to be.
Oh, sure.
And so Doug is doing the application. And one of the problems with calling it French polishing is right now he's French, you know, applying. So tomorrow, after this, you know, cures a little bit, is when he'd actually polish the instrument. And by polish, I mean use abrasives, use the spiriting off technique to bring it to a, you know, a high shine, really level it down. Does that sound reasonable, Doug?
Yeah, that's true to a degree. We're starting to get a pretty good shine as it is. Like I said, some of what you're seeing is the vapor trail leaving that behind. If I continue to do what I was doing and I wanted to start to add, if I felt I had a good enough build, which I'm pretty close to it, but not almost there. If I wanted to get if I felt like I was at the build that I wanted to be, I would take a little more alcohol in my pad, inject a little bit, not a ton, but I'm now going to start to dilute the shellac for the favoring more alcohol.
Oh, Carl, I just applied some reading comprehension to the email that you sent me. The on the delaminating finish, it's not great at it in my estimation. My experience using Cellusolve to fix delaminating finish is that it'll flow like right up to the very edge of your delam and then leave this nice little still delammed line around it. So I might be, once again, using it wrong, but my experience dealing with delam finish with Cellusolve has not been. It'll certainly solidify it. It'll kind of glue it all together, but it doesn't look right.
I've got more alcohol in the finish, and now I'm starting to enter a polishing stage.
This is bold stuff, people.
And from where I'm standing, I can see a pretty flat finish to the surface, there's a small film of oil around the top.
Doug, it looks like you're putting some extra mustard on the ball there. Are you leaning into that pad a little bit?
I'm hitting the guitar harder for sure. You can even hear how, as I'm putting more alcohol on it, or if I've got more alcohol on the pad, I put a little bit more oil on it just to make sure they don't stick or stop. But now I'm no longer doing my figure eights. I'm no longer doing my circles. I'm just trying to back and forth and bring this to a shine. And what we just saw was probably an abbreviated version. I don't know, I've probably been putting finish on this solidly now for maybe 20, 30 minutes instead of talking like we were before. You know, I might be at this for the better part of an hour before I got to this point. But now I'm just trying to shine up the finish nicely.
What kind of jams do you like listen to while you're doing this?
I normally don't even listen to anything. I just spend most of the, thinking about what I gotta do, and as I start to get a finish, a shine that I'm interested in, I'm keeping an eye on the reflection of everything that I'm looking at. So I can see, what kind of reflection I have of materials that they're not, they're not hazy.
That looks really nice.
As I get to a point where I think the pad is working against me, then I'll just switch using my hand.
So that's little bits of oil that's coming off now. That's
Yep, that's just me pushing around the oil.
little burnish.
Yep.
Little burnishing, little.
So of getting the finish on a guitar, it's getting there. If I got more finish on it, probably about a half an hour's worth of more finish, it would start looking much deeper. Like I said, and it also depends on how thick a finish you go for and how much of a build you have before you start spiriting off. Sometimes it's good just to let it sit overnight before you it's where I might not want to. I had a arch top. Yeah. Arch top. It's got a dull finish. We sanded this up yesterday in preparation for this, but it's had a dull finish where it's got a lot of little, things to be filled and what have you. But we're going to take, probably in this case, I want to start with a fresh pad. I want to use a pad I've been rolling stuff on with another guitar.
Doug, we've been at this for 2 hours. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling fine. You mean in terms of being tired? Yeah, just, the physical this is the only physical exercise I ever get anyway.
Okay.
So, French polishing never really bothered me in terms of its physical aspects of it. What I can do is for next time I can continue to, because I haven't done the sides on my guitar yet. I can do the sides and get the finish to where I would normally have it on the back of the guitar. Probably after, an hour, a total of an hour and a half's worth of time. And then just leave it and we can watch the spiriting off part of it on the next time as part of the repair thing. The only difference here is you'd be dealing with a guitar that has different qualities. You have areas where you have F holes to get around. Initially on there. Full length. As soon as I begin to feel it drag, and here's an example. Where we have now a fingerboard that's kind of in our way. And we have F holes to try to steer our way around. This is where the little guy nearby is going to be advantageous. Towards that. Same way. Charge a bigger bed.
So Doug, you want to walk us through why you'd French polish this rather than give it a quick blast with a spray gun?
Well, for me, it depends on what my goals are. So my
Yes.
goal with this guitar is to have kind of an aged looking finish. Very often when I'm spraying lacquer over the top of another finish that's already under there, I don't know what it was. I don't necessarily have a good appreciation of what they used. I don't know whether it's nitro, I don't know if it's water based, I don't know if it's poly, I don't know if it's shellac and then something else on it. And rather than guess and then spray finish on top of something, if I want an old looking finish or a finish that looks like it's got some age to it, I don't know of a better way to do it than with shellac. Because you can, you can almost dial in your desired amount of shininess, whether you want a dull finish, like on that Gretsch. I was actually not looking for a super shiny finish. So you can do certain, and we'll do some of that next time as well, for the repair part of it, how to get your freshly polished finish to look like it's got some age to it. So with the smaller pad here, I'm just spending a lot more time around fingerboard extension here, so I can get a build of a finish around it. You know, and you think about it, I've heard people say things like, well, French polishing takes too much time. You know, if I had an hour to an hour and a half with this guitar in French polish, I'll have a guitar that's virtually where I need it to be, in pretty short order, as opposed to having to, turn on the compressor, set up my paint guns. Get my base coats on there.
Doug, two questions just rolled in. Jacob wants to know what grit did you prep that to? And then Larry wants to know temperature and humidity on French polishing. Or is it susceptible to being fussier in different climates?
First answer to the first question was 400 grit, same as the other. This was prepped to 400 grit. As far as temperature and humidity, yeah, if you're in a super humid environment, that can certainly be having an impact on your shellac, partially due to what you mix your shellac with. If you're using denatured alcohol as opposed to, an ethyl alcohol or an ethanol, excuse me, like Everclear or something like that, denatured alcohol absorbs moisture. So very often, if you wind up getting cloudiness in your French polish, it can be due to using using denatured alcohol as opposed to like a grain alcohol. Grain alcohol will have less whitening going on. If you've ever tried to clean out a bottle with denatured alcohol, say a bottle of lacquer or a bottle of shellac, after you use it, you use denatured alcohol to clean it, notice it kind of turns white on the inside, and it's hard to get rid of that white. That's an indication that it absorbs moisture. So if you're in a super humid, I mean, I'm guessing like Hawaii type humidity, I would think that you'd have to be conscious of your humidity conditions. But I don't think in most, even in high humid conditions.
Yeah, Larry, I can tell you, I lived in Tennessee, and French polishing and Nashville humidity was not sweet. I mean, so the shellac is, off gassing the alcohol, and you have to have like an atmosphere willing to accept the off gassed alcohol. So in general, just kind of as a rule of thumb, I think you're probably going to do the same thing. You're just not going to do it as quickly, And so I also think that if you just like have a window AC in your shop, and you dial your humidity down to and your temperature down to something normal, then, or not normal, but something that shellac enjoys, then you're probably going to be having a better day.
So here you can see the initial builds that we're getting.
Dan would like you to make a muscle with your polishing arm. I think, yeah, I'd go more with the triceps, I think. But The humidity issues are during the application, not a week later, right? That was my experience.
What's that?
In high humidity areas, it wasn't necessarily that you were getting weird, like with lacquer, it wasn't like you were getting blushing or something like that with the humidity. What Doug said about your alcohol selection is 100% right. If you put something in there that attracts moisture, that's going to be your cloudiness. But yeah, just in general, like if if there's nowhere for the solvents to go, then
That would be the same with lacquer, wouldn't it?
say that again.
You would have the same issues with lacquer gassing off as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have seen advertised on a lot of the places where you would buy shellac. I have seen shellac retarder. I've never used it.
I think Jeff Jewett has some shellac retarder on Homestead. There's also we didn't put it in the link, but there's shellac.net, or put it on the Patreon. But shellac. Oh wait, no. What was the one that you called me out on? Not Homestead Finishing. Wood Finishing Enterprises has some unique shellac additives as well. Let me pull that up really quick. So you've not used shellac retarder?
I've never felt the need to use it, mostly because everywhere I work, I insist on central air conditioning.
It gets, this is to the fellow that's in North Alabama, like New York State in the summer can get pretty juicy too.
Sure.
So if you're comparable to Doug on atmospheric juiciness levels, then you're probably good to go.
Ian, I got a long phone call about 20 minutes in on this thing. Although I was watching, I missed the conversation. I really wanted to get it. This is recorded. Are you going to send an email out with a link to the recording?
Yeah. When I post it, do you get the messages from Patreon?
Right. Very good. Thanks.
Yep.
You can start to see the shine starting to build.
Doug, you ever accidentally dropped your tampon in the F hole there?
Nope.
Okay.
I've gotten it stuck, right on the corner. And the whole thing behind this whole process is practice, quite frankly. It's find a crash dummy guitar that you can, or even for that matter, just a hunk of wood. But a crash dummy guitar that you can use as a guinea pig. Start with.
What would you say is more challenging to do? An arch top like this with the F holes and the fingerboard extension, or getting around a classical guitar bridge? That seems crazy.
Well, there are some things you can do. A lot of times those classical bridges have a finish on it.
Yeah.
So you're butting up against the bridge, and then later you can put a finish on it. Very often I'll tape off what I'm doing. A lot of times in production, those guitars will have been French polished before the bridge goes on. So, in some cases, it might even be better part of valor just to pop the bridge, French polish the guitar, put the bridge back on.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got like major work to do, if the customer comes in, if it depends on what the work is. I remember there was that the one I did for the splint demonstration where we looked through the slideshow. That was somebody brought me a guitar that had the crack repaired more than once, so we wound up putting in a splint. And I chose not to replace the bridge on that one. I chose not to pull the bridge just because I had enough fish to fry. So here's a case where as I'm building, there are certain areas that I'm gonna want. Just gonna put a bunch of dust on there. Pull off the excess.
I may have missed this. What grit pumice is that?
That's 4,
4F.
4F. And I'll come in from outside of that, and I'll start using that as a both leveling agent and, you know, a little bit of a what it is, which is abrasive. Try to kind of level off the finish as I'm also adding it. That's going to help with my ultimate, the depth of my shine. It's not a lot of oil in this, except for all the little droplets I put on the pad. Very often, as I start to feel like maybe this area that we were just in start to get a little sticky, I'm going to pull back out. As this area gets a little sticky here, I'll come and concentrate over here. You know, letting that all settle in as I go, and I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes over here before I come back. The shape. What I'm doing is I don't want to do this forever on a guitar because then I'll never have any finish here. So it's a constant motion. Switch to my tuning pad. Here. Switch around here because it's the one finish.
Pad fell down, Doug.
What I mean about hitting the top of the end hole there, start to stick it out.
Larry says in the chat, I am amazed at how fast you get the build. I tried to French polish the Flamenca Blanca that I built. I found it very difficult, really difficult. The Andalusian luthier I learned from, Paco de Chorobo, talked about the guitar finishers in Spain that he uses when his clients allow. Polish for 30 minutes or so, 3 days, then on 3 days off, or 3 days off for a month or 6 weeks. But you and Robbie O'Brien technique build sufficient finish seemingly so much faster, and you don't ever get crazy.
Well, you know, it's to some degree, of course, the way we're demonstrating it today was the two guitars that were at, you know, we're here already had some finish on them, to be fair.
Yeah.
If we were starting from a bare finish or bare wood, the build would be not as quick, but it would be maybe half again as slow. So
Yeah.
but it does build surprisingly quickly.
If you,
Some
the
of
other-
that is the pumice stone. Some of that, of course, is the additives. Very early on in the case of this arch top, I switched to my shellac that had sanderac and gum in it, so I could get a little bit of a thicker finish. Also depends on what pound cut you're starting with. We talked last time about the difference between a 2 pound cut and a 1 pound cut and what have you.
Mhm.
The thicker your cut, the faster you'll put your finish on. It'll get stickier quicker.
The other thing too is there are just real limits to, like, if you're trying to build a finish as thick as lacquer or as deep looking as lacquer, shellac is just not your, it's not your finish choice. It's
It's
just,
gonna get there pretty quick though.
it can, yeah, but like, yeah, what you're talking about, how you have a, you know, a lacquer base coat and you're really putting a shine on it here. That's so much different than trying to build like a, you know, a 7/1000th thickness shellac
Yeah, that's true.
finish. That's like,
If you will get there quicker if you use a drying oil. Now we're gonna quickly, just for demonstration purposes, if you can see how much of a shine you have here, we're gonna see how if we can dramatically tell the difference between that and what a drying oil does. I would, under usual circumstances, depending on how long I was going to be doing this, I might switch to a fresh pad. In case to them, it's going to be the same pad I have been using. And just a couple of drops, just a drop of my walnut oil.
So I have a question. I think I didn't unmute on that one. If you accidentally stop and leave a mark, how long does it take to get that mark out? I found it to be difficult, really difficult.
Here. On a small pad.
Doug, do you find like if you leave a mark in it that it's best just to keep going business as usual, or do you actually work that area? I mean, business as usual, and then it'll probably even out over the course of your French polishing, or do you actually work that area where you've left the mark with a specific technique?
Let me see here. I loaded up a pretty heavy amount of finish on the smaller pad. And oops.
Oh, geez.
Oh, no.
Doug.
We have an area that now is all messed up.
Yeah.
Just to answer the question.
Thank you.
So to me, I'll switch to a bigger pad now.
That's shellac?
That's shellac. This to me is where the magic of pumice stone comes in.
Oh, pumice.
Jacob, on finding the things like gum mastic and sanderac in the European market, I would bet that any violin supply place is going to have both those items for you in abundance.
There is a, I'm trying to remember the name. There's a supplier of any of our British pals. There's a supplier in London or in England that is a huge supplier of finishes. They have everything under the sun when it comes to shellac. If somebody could remember the name.
Oh, we forgot to tell him how you worked that nasty spot out.
I still am. Pumice stone
So
acts.
that's pumice and shellac you're adding, or pumice and oil?
I'm just shellac and pumice stone. So I'm adding, just sprinkling on pumice, blowing off whatever excess I've got there. And that pumice is taking the shellac and adding a certain amount of body to it. Plus, it's now acting as an abrasive in my area that I purposely effed up.
If you tried to do it without that, you just kind of like push it around and
Yeah,
dig a hole, right?
I think
Well,
that,
what happened is that the shape of your little crater would get just like you would with any kind of finish. If you had created a crater in your finish, you would just kind of keep building it in the shape of whatever crater you had. So you would just kind of be adding finish on top of
yeah,
the misshapen area, whereas the pumice stone is now acting as a way for me to both fill and sand, for the lack of a better description,
leveling.
the area.
When I was learning to French polish at Grins, we did not add. I was never taught to add pumice, and I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this. If I was going to try my hand at it again, is that pumice seems to be maybe not a panacea, but it certainly is an active ingredient in this process, more so than I would have guessed.
Well, it's certainly adding to my polish, that's for sure. It's certainly adding to the build. It's adding to the depth of the finish.
Dan, do you pumice your polish? Dan Earlywine, you're muted. I muted you.
I have pumice, but every time I use it, I don't really get the results I want, but I will after this.
For me, it's a matter of I concentrate on an area and I sprinkle it on pretty liberally.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep a pretty wet pad. And when you're using pumice, you do have to use a little bit more oil. And like I said before, the analogy I like is to cooking, in the sense that, you try different things and you get different results, and you say, oh, I like those results for a particular kind of setting or for a particular kind of job. And so you just continually experiment and say, what this does for me. Now here, we've got a bunch of different things that are going on in the process. We're using pumice stone. I've switched to the hardening oil, which is now going to become part of to whatever degree it's going to become part of my my shellac, as the oil that merely penetrates the shellac. And of course, pumice stone being added to act as a hardening agent, or not a hardening agent, a leveling agent.
I'd like to interject too for people starting out. If you're going after this, like Doug's got a lot of instinctual things in here that you're just going to have to build up for yourself by trial and error. But if things start going sideways for you and you're getting, your pad's dragging and you're getting marks in the project that you can't seem to get out, you just wait a day, come back, abrade it back down to level, and give it a whirl again. Of course, all of those, if you're working on a valuable instrument, take sensitivity training for your abrasion, because you don't want to abrade to color coats or anything like that. So, but you can, like if you get into kind of a death spiral on this, just give it a day, flatten it back out, and then give it another whirl.
We look that area again.
Yeah, that's flat.
Yeah, it's flat.
So bigger pad, pumice, vigorous motions.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking at the finish, you got a pretty high gloss there.
Yeah.
You know, got a pretty deep gloss. There's a little bit of oil on it, and I've still got probably some building to go. But that's starting to look like a good lacquer finish. It's pretty flat. It's pretty reflective. I probably, I've only been at this one for about 15 minutes, but we've got a pretty,
Doug, Dan wanted to know what you had done to this top beforehand. You had sanded it to 400, but was there a repair on this that had, like, did you do a crack repair on something and then
no, this is a guitar built by Aaron Wald early on in
oh yeah, that young fella.
I think he built this when he was still in college. Or this he might have built when he was at Summit. This may be the first archtop he built. But it's had some finish issues over the time. There was a period of time where he sanded it back and tried to redo the sunburst, and then I think it had some binding issues. I can't remember what. So it's become kind of a project guitar. But here's a quick demonstration of how to get this down closer. Now we've got a pretty deep shine there. It's not what I would consider a built finish completely, but it's got a pretty nice build on it pretty quickly. And it's got a pretty nice shine on it that I would like to see from a guitar that looks like old lacquer. A little bit thicker, a little bit more leveling with pumice stone, and then a good flashing, and you would have a nice, really shiny, almost like a lacquer finish. But if I wanted to try to create, there we go. So you can see how shiny this looks here. If I had a guitar in where the rest of the guitar was, and it depends on what the goals of the customer are. If the customer wants the guitar all brightened up, we can give him a super shiny instrument with a good deep wet look of a finish. If I want the guitar to blend in with, if I was like working on that, when I was working on a Guild or like an old 335 where you got deep haze to the finish where it's a dullish kind of almost satin, that's where we're going to use our rotten stone. While the finish is still not gassed off, still a little wet. If I press really hard in the finish, it's not terrible. I didn't leave a print. So it's already a pretty hard finish.
Can you use your own human oils for French polishing too?
Oh, sure. If you're looking at in a case like this, how much of the shine is because of the sander rack, how much of the shine is because of the walnut oil, how much of the shine is because of the pumice stone, being the abrasive in the finish. It's hard to say, but here's a nice little trick for getting a guitar to look older. I'm going to use my rotten stone.
How rotten is that rotten stone? Is there only one grit of rotten stone, or is that got a F component to it too?
I think every rotten stone I've ever bought, I haven't seen a rating on it.
Huh.
So, but I'm going to put that on the finish, and then you can rate your partner's makeup kit.
So this is how you'd find a dinosaur bone too, right?
While this is still a little wet,
That looks nice.
the rotten stone can get, is going to stay embedded in the finish. And if I don't polish it up again with shellac on top of it, I can get the guitar to look a little bit on the older side. And you literally salt to taste or pepper to taste.
Can you do that with pumice too, but to a lesser effect or a different effect?
I've always used rotten stone because rotten stone is finer.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a certain dustiness to it
Yeah.
that, if you want to get creative with it, you can literally kind of rub into the finish in certain areas if you want to get it to kind of look like an old guitar. If you're trying to keep it a part of a guitar that you're trying to do a repair to, like with on that Gretsch, I was trying to touch up this area here. The rest of the guitar looked like it had been dragged through the parking lot in terms of how dusty and how much dirt was in the finish.
Larry also noted that rotten stone has another name, which is Tripoli, which some of the waxy compounds for applying to buffing wheels are called Tripoli. Must be the same abrasive.
Yes. So here, the other thing I like about rotten stone is that if I leave it in certain areas untouched and I don't brush it away, it kind of looks like dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can get a look that's like kind of old lacquer.
Have you used that on lacquer just as a subtle de-sheener?
Right, but as opposed to this, where I look like I've got kind of a freshly finished guitar, I've got something that looks a little bit older. And that you can, like I said, you can salt the taste, you can get as creative with it as you want.
So Larry notes that microscopically speaking, rotten stone has round edges, whereas the pumice has jagged, pointy edges.
That I wasn't aware of.
That's good to know, Larry. Hey, Doug, we're at 2.5 hours. I think we should probably, unless you got, do you have anything?
Well, just as an example,
Okay.
if after what I just did, I want to brighten that back up again, I just got to put more finish on it.
Okay.
And that'll start to polish right up. But if I left it to dry like I did, looking old, and left it overnight, it would harden that way overnight, and you would have kind of a
low sheen. That's
cool. You have a low sheen if you're doing a repair that you're trying to hide under some shellac, and after having done a touch up, and you want it to kind of match the dirtiness of the rest of the guitar. If the guitar was, kind of an old guitar that somebody didn't want you to brighten up. I mean, most customers want their guitars back looking better than they did before they dropped them off.
I don't like those customers. Me and those customers have an arrangement.
Customer comes in with the relic from Fender's Custom Shop is everybody's favorite customer because
Yes.
you can't find anything on that guitar, even if you did have an accident. But that's the whole process. So where we started, was here. And where we finished, just for this session. Is,
that looks really nice.
Yeah. So, you can get a build pretty quickly. Like I said, that was probably only about 20 minutes worth of work. After an hour, it would be hard pressed to tell with this guitar didn't just come out of the finishing department.
Yeah, that looks really nice.
If you with Sharon, we posted Sharon picked the music for some little reel I did with the D'Angelico with some French music behind it, and that thing shines like shined like a brand new penny.
Yeah.
You know, so you can dial in how much gloss you want versus how dull a finish you want fairly easily with a French polish without having to, you know, even fire up the air compressor. And like I said, there's a certain liberation and freedom that comes from not having to fire up the air compressor just to do a touch-up job.
Air compressor is noisy.
Doug, how many coats of French polishing do you find will yield a nice chantoyance?
In terms of like a deep shine?
Yeah, that fluorescent chantoyance kind of.
I don't know if I knew, I don't even know if I'd know how to measure that in coats, only because every time you swipe, you're putting another trail of finish on.
Yeah.
So the way I typically measure it is how many French polishing sessions I have in.
So maybe that's what I'm talking about. How many sessions would you do to
So,
get
you know,
a really deep sheen?
You're looking at the arch top that's sitting there after about 20 minutes. I would normally, you know, if I was doing it for you know, an actual job, I would probably be good for 30 to 45 minutes before I'd kind of be satisfied with where it's looking. Then I'd walk away and go do something else, or I'd flip it over to the back of the guitar and start that. And I might be into a guitar for about a good full hour if I did the back, the sides, and the front all at once. And then I'll, you know, then I would let it harden up for the next day and look at it with fresh eyes, and then, you know, the following morning. And I'll decide how deep of wet a finish I want to do. So if I want something that looks like it's got a, you know, almost like a poly finish of like, you know, that dipped look,
Yeah.
I might have 3 or 4 sessions in it. So for a total of maybe 2 hours, maybe 2 to 3 hours, depending on how long those sessions were. Sometimes, depending on the repair that I'm doing, you know, I'll have like a Martin side crack that I'll be in and out of it in 15 or 20 minutes of rubbing.
Yeah.
And then it'll look good. And then I decide, okay, am I going to dress it down to get it to look as crappy as the rest of the guitar is, or is my customer's charge to me to get the rest of the guitar looking as good as it can? And those are different repair scenarios that, you know, you have the freedom to choose. Like I said, you know, comparatively, I've always heard everybody describe French polishing as, oh, it takes too long.
Yeah.
I don't agree, because, you know, if you think about it, by the time you mix up your lacquer, you get all your accoutrement together, fire up the compressor, and you spray your base coats, then you spray your coats on top of that. You got waiting in between, you got remixing of lacquer, and then you got to come back, and then you got to level sand, and then you got to spray another coat on top of that. Next thing you know, it's like a week later, you're either still spraying, or you're level sanding, or you're doing more touch up and spraying more on top of that. And there's call for that sometimes, but I just find the luxury of just being able to, you know, grab a bottle and start rubbing finish on to be, you know, quite liberating.
You don't have to wear a mask.
And it's all natural. It's non-toxic. You know, you're not stinking up the whole place. So if your shop is in the second bedroom of the house, and, you know, you have to give your whole family notice that you've got a touch-up job coming to tomorrow, you know, that it's a nice alternative for a lot of repairs. That when I first started learning how to do French polishing, I learned it almost strictly as a finish that you put on classical guitar customers' guitars. And then the more I used it and the more I learned about it, the more scenarios that I've, you know, found it works beautifully. And it's, you know, I'll grab a bottle of shellac almost as quickly as I'll grab either a rattle can or fire up the compressor. You know, it depends on my goals.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wants me to, you know, to spray a camouflage on their Les Paul, and then I'm shooting lacquer, or probably shooting enamel for that matter. You know?
I've found with lacquer that I think Gibson did an analysis and found that 1 coat of lacquer is about 1/1000th of an inch. So if you put 8 coats and you rub out 3 times, you're down to anywhere well, it could be more, 12 coats, and you're up to 6 when you're done. But I like it down to 3, as thin as possible, and that's where French polishing a new guitar takes its advantage. Is there's nothing weighting down the soundboard, so you get more responsiveness acoustically. And that's been my experience. But where French polishing comes in with lacquer is it's so easy with a thin finish on the top to go to the edge and take a little off. And if you've got a wood binding on there, that shows as a dull against the sheen of the lacquer. I just take a French polish pen. This is where I've used it, and just go over that, and the sheen's right back. You don't have to respray anything. I used to, when I was young, respray all the time. It drove me crazy. But French polish just took care of all the edges. No problem.
It's the world's easiest terrible finish.
Oh yeah, and for touch up, nothing like it. Except as Dan pointed out a little while ago, on a Martin 15 sheen flat guitar. Those things are a bear. You can't buff them. You can't French polish them.
Then you're just grabbing a can of satin finish lacquer or matte finish lacquer and spraying.
Well, I found I had this problem a few weeks ago, and I found something that works really good, and it's Watco satin wax, not Watco oil, but they make a finish called satin wax. And I put a note in the chat, but in case everybody didn't see it, if you've got a little something on there that's too shiny after you had to rub it out, like if you're putting a binding back on a waist, and it's a little bit more shiny than the rest of the thing, you put that satin wax on, it goes right away. It smells real nice, and there's no muss, no fuss. It's just amazing. It's quite a discovery for me, because it was a problem. Half the cars come in here, Martin 15 sheen.
Yeah, I have to check that out. That sounds interesting.
All right. So should we I'll start the leaf along back up.
Yeah.
And we can talk over there. I gotta go finish putting the brakes on my car.
Sure. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, certainly DM me.
Fantastic as always. It was really nice seeing that. I might get my my pad going again. It's been some time since I tried my hand at it, but
You should write a book, but I'm sure there's no money in it.
oh, also Jacob wanted to know if he could DM you on Instagram.
What was that?
Jacob Kraft wanted to know if he could DM you on Instagram.
Oh, of course, anytime. Sure.
All right, fellas, everybody, say thanks to Doug.
That was
He's
great.
the
Thank you.
specialist.
Thanks, Doug.
He is the guitar specialist.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Doug.
There's free coffee
awesome.
coming at you here pretty soon.
Thanks, man.
Take care, guys.
See ya.
Guys.
Thank you.